Hey friends, today we begin a look at the 7 deadly sins. The 7 deadly sins you're not going to find listed as such anywhere in the scriptures, but rather these are life challenges that each and every one of us face that have been identified by scholars and theologians through the centuries. The chief of the 7 deadly sins is the sin of pride, and all the other deadly sins in many ways go back to this one chief sin, the sin of pride. Now, what is pride? Pride is having an inaccurate view of ourselves. It's seeing ourselves more highly than we ought to see ourselves, but it's also at the same time the opposite of that is seeing ourselves more lowly than we ought. So on one hand, it is about being boastful when we ought not to be boastful. On the other hand, it is seeing ourselves beyond the point of redemption, beyond the point of hope. So if pride is not seeing ourselves as we ought to see ourselves, the opposite of that is the virtue of humility. And this is the sweet spot where we see ourselves as we ought to see ourselves. This is where we see ourselves as God sees us, and we see ourselves in relation to Him. So there are a number of consequences when it comes to the sin of pride. The first consequence is isolation. No one likes to be around a know-it-all. No one likes to be around a braggart. At the same time, it isolates us from other people. Pride also isolates us from God. It says in the book of James chapter 4, that God contends against the proud. In other words, He casts the proud out of His presence. At the same time, it goes on to say that those who humble themselves, that they will be lifted up. So pride, it isolates us from others. It also isolates us from God, because the only true way to have a relationship with God is through humility. A second thing that pride does is it leads us to disillusionment and despair. In our culture in America, we're told that if we put our mind to it, that we can accomplish anything. But we have to recognize that this is a lie, because we have certain human limitations, and no matter how much we put our mind to some things, we may not be able to accomplish it. And so when we set our minds to it, when we put all of our effort into a task, what ends up happening is we fail and we come up short, and we're left disillusioned, and we're left in despair. Now, while we may not be able to accomplish certain things, what does it say in the book of Philippians? That in Christ I can do all things. So we find our hope in Him. Our boasting is not in ourselves. Our boasting comes in Christ. So pride leads to disillusionment and despair, along with isolation. Another thing that pride causes is it causes a lack of breakthrough. Sometimes we can have all the right pieces in place. We can have the right education. We can have the right people in our lives. We can have the right plan. We can have the right vision. But for whatever reason, we continue to just kind of lag along. I know this happens as a pastor in my ministry. I focus in on building a better church, and I do so on my strength through my vision, or dynamic preaching, or having the right plan in place, having the right people on different boards and committees. But the problem is we're trying to build the church on our strength rather than on God. God doesn't want a capable, visionary, multi-talented pastor as much as He wants a dependent pastor, a pastor who looks to Him. But I like having things dependent upon me. Why do I like having things dependent upon me? Well, it's because then I get the credit. I get to brag about, what I am doing, what I am accomplishing. I like to have the pat on the back. I like to have the compliments. But sometimes that breakthrough fails to come because God is just waiting for that moment where He is going to get the glory. He is going to get the credit rather than us getting the glory, us getting the credit. So in all of this, how do we strive towards humility and push away from pride? Well, it starts with a relationship with Jesus, because in many ways the only one who has lived a humble life is Jesus Himself. Philippians chapter 2 talks about how He humbled Himself. He gave up the riches of heaven, and He humbled Himself even to death, an agonizing death upon the cross. So if we're to know humility, we are to know Jesus Christ. He sets the bar for us. He sets the example, and we discover it by looking to Him. And we we recognize humility when we see just how much that he has done for us. Humility is not found in discovering how lowly we are. Humility is not found in dwelling upon our sin, but rather humility is found by dwelling upon and focusing in on the greatness of God. Think about Moses. Think about Elijah. Think about Isaiah. Think about John. What was the cause of their humility? And really, in so many ways, the cause of their humility was that they encountered in the fullness the living, awesome God. God alone is holy. God alone is righteous. And when we understand who he is, our only response is one of humility. So, friends, I hope you enjoyed our lesson today. We'll be back again next week. Have a great weekend. See you soon. Have a good day. Bye.